but it will also force us to try to understand the idea of kedoshim as well, the concept of kedusha. So Rashi says, as you can see here, Rashi says that in the beginning of kedoshim, he says kedoshim tiyu, and Rashi says like this. He says, "Hevu prushim." Hevu prushim mean ha'arayos umin ha'erva. So Rashi says. So let's see, I made it too big. Okay. Rashi says hevu prushim min ha'arayos umin ha'erva, and Shakol makom shatamot geder erva tamot kedusha. Rashi says, any place that you find a geder erva, a situation in which there is a fence up to erva, you also find this concept of kedusha. So essentially, Rashi keeps on going. He says, Isha. So he says, how do I know this? He says, Isha zona v'chalala. So those psukim that Rashi is quoting in the Kedoshim are actually they're in the first 10 psukim of Parshas Emor, which is this week's Parsha, right? And essentially what Rashi is doing is something that's a pliya. Rashi is basically saying, look, I can prove to you that this idea of Kedoshim it means being parush from arayos and avera, right? And how do I know that? Because look, it says by a kohen in Parshas Emor, which is not called Parshas Kedoshim. So you would think maybe it would be a proof from somewhere in Parshas Kedoshim, but from Parshas Emor later on by a kohen that says that he can't marry a zona or a chalala, a kain hedyot. And it says because I'm Shem and Hashem Kadishchem. So therefore, you see that kedusha means geder erva, and you're parush from arayos or from erva, right? In the Char, that's a pliya. It's a pliya because number one, why is Rashi going out of the parsha called kedoshim to find the definition of kedusha? Number two, that pasuk is talking about a kohen, talking about a lav, right? For a kohen, a grusha or a chalala is a lav. It's a lav for him not to get married to one of these types of people. And so how's Rashi saying that he's bringing the definition for kedusha, which means to be parchment arayis, which is kares, and he's bringing that from a pasuk that talks about a kohen not being able to, get married to someone who's also to him in terms of a lav. That makes no sense. Arayis achar the ikr. Those are three big kashas. Now, in general, there's another kasha that goes the following. Look, if you look here, this is the end of kedoshim, right? And it says v'skadishtem v'isem kedoshim ki ani Hashem Elokechem. You shall become holy, and you will be holy, right? So I guess the first one was like a process. You shall become holy, and then you will be holy. Right, it'll be maintained, and then it's saying because I am Hashem your God, and then it says and it says ki ish ish. In other words, you'll do all these things, and because a man was makala, and then it goes to veh. So every time there's a veh, we know that throughout the Gemara, the veh is a vav machaber, which basically means that it connects the two inyanim together. So in other words, if it says veh, that essentially means that it's going back on the original thing. So technically, the correct way to read this would be that and then the u and the ki, which is because, and the vez mechaber everything. So really, it seems like these psukim are saying straight up that that erva, which is what it actually talks about here in the end of the parsha, all these different ervos, kala, achosam, imo, eshes aviv, eshes ish. All these things that are actually erva, actually arayas, actually that you get kares, and they're in that whole parsha, that is seemingly saying that those things you can't do because I want you to be holy. So what's going on? Meaning, this is seemingly pretty clear that the pasuk is saying as a result of you being holy, you're not going to do these. So you see clearly that holiness means not indulging arayas. So what shaykhus? What is Rashi doing? Rashi's going to Parshas Emor and talking about a lav with a kohen that he can't have a grusha or a halala or a zaina, and he's saying from there you see that kedusha means geder erva. It's a pliya atzuma. Other kasha is, what's Rashi saying? Geder have a prushim mina arayas mina avera. What does that mean? Have a prushim mina arayas mina avera? Anochap avera lachar means a sin, an avera. So arayas is a type of avera. So say have a prushim mina averas. What are you trying to tell me? Arayas and then avera? I mean, Rashi is not. It doesn't make any sense. Also, what does Rashi Betzim even mean by have a prushim mi? What does that mean? Be parush from it. Meaning, if you're not taking it seriously, you're just reading it. You're saying, okay, it means that, when you don't do the arayas, so therefore you're considered kadosh. But the pshat of precious, the definition of the word precious that Rashi uses, is the pshat that you are parush, you're separated from it, right? Which simply speaking means that it refers to it on an identity level. In other words, you're separated from this thing. It's not, if Rashi meant what people read Rashi as meaning, he should have just said that it means al tasu arayos of averos. Don't do arayos and averos. And what does parush min arayos and min averos mean? Min avera mean? So those are really the questions. And I think in order to answer the questions, we have to basically open up the sugya of trying to understand somewhat a definition for the concept of kedusha as in general. People mistakenly think that kedusha means the definition of being kadosh is this idea that you abstain. Now, in reality, abstinence does not mean kedusha, and your abstaining doesn't make you a holy person. That is completely incorrect. Not only that, it is in fact a chet. It is a avera, it's a sin to abstain. And there's several Gemaras that talk about this. Some of them are brought over here in about a Nazir, right? Nazir is another individual in the Torah who's called Kadosh, and Chazal say, what does it mean by a Nazir when it says that he was chot down the nefesh? Right? In other words, he refrained from drinking wine, this Nazir, and as a result, he has to bring a carbon. He has to bring a carbon chatas because he sinned. He did a sin that he was parish from the yain. This is what this Gemara is saying. You did a sin by being parish from yain, and therefore you have to bring a carbon chatas on the sin that you did of not drinking wine for 30 days. And this is part of the inherent process of Nazir. Now, obviously, you'll ask me, okay, is this a joke? Because you're saying that you have to bring a carbon for the fact that he sinned, but that's part of the process of being Nazir. So then it's like you're being masakin that he should sin and then bring a carbon. You're masakin that he should bring a carbon on the sin that he did. I mean, it makes no sense. So that's a valid question. But it's clear, and there's over here, the Mesilas Yesharim, when he talks about the concept of precious, he brings over here several things as well that Chazal say in Yerushalmi Nedarim, lo daicha mash asr Torah el sh'at oser alacha dvar macher. And there's a Chazal that says that asr mitin din l'fi hamakom hakom asher einav l'ratz alacha menu af b'shem mutu hayayachol. Right? And then because it says in Koheles, v'chol asher sha'alu einai lo atzalti mehem. Right? So in other words, there is a clear, the Mesilas Yesharim gives a halach over here, which I think obviously is interesting, but it doesn't satisfy the main vort, I don't think. And so it's clear from Chazal, and again, all these could be looked up, that the idea of answering yourself with anything that was mutter to you is a sin. It's incorrect, and it does not produce kedusha at all. So it is a mistake to think that Parshas on its own creates a level of Kedusha. It doesn't. And so now that we understand that, let's understand how Parshas fits in and what Taka does this idea of Kedusha actually mean. So if we're going back to the example of Nazir, right, the emor discusses there the Masechta this idea that a lot of people took on Naziris incorrectly, and therefore it says that Shimon Tzaddik said, he never ate from the meat of an Asham Nazir, which is when a Nazir is supposed to not become tamei to a dead person, he does. So when he brings the carbon, Rabbi Shimon Tzaddik never ate those carbon except for one, which was Pamaras Ba'adam Echad Nazir Min Adaram. A Nazir came from the Dharm, he had beautiful eyes, he was tovrei, good looking, and his hair was beautifully fell down on his head. I mean, this is at the end of the 30 days, so he had cut his hair off, and then it grew back, and now he's coming to bring the karbanos. No, why did you want to, destroy your hair like this? And so he said, I was a shepherd of my father in the city, and I went to fill up water from a well, and I looked at my image in a mirror, and my Yitzhahara said, oh, wow, look how good looking you are. I should go out and do with the woman and all this stuff. And so I said to my Yitzhahara, why are you being gaivadik in a world doesn't belong to you? You're going to end up, the physical components end up being worms and maggots. Avoda, right? I make a avoda is like lashon of shvua. I'm going to shave off my hair for Shem Shemayim. So Rabbi Shimon Tzaddik, right? This is Rabbi Shimon Tzaddik says, "Miyad amarti nashki rosh amarto beni kamocher b'nodejes b'Yisrael. Alecha kasavomer ish giafu lindor neder nazir lashem." Right? So this idea of nazir, and this is really where you start to see the actual definition of kedusha. The definition of kedusha is when a person makes a decision in his life to take on and to become something that is more than what he is now, right? And he wants to separate himself even further than what he has already been separated, right? And this idea of kedusha, in terms of its relationship to separation, is not the pshat that the etzem definition of kedusha means that one thing is separated from another. The pshat is that when someone wants to be more kadosh, he wants to become in a higher, he wants to go to a higher level and take on a new status, a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that new definition that he takes on has a requirement of being separate, because all definition needs to be separate from something else in order for it to be itself. So, for example, the first time in the Torah where it uses the word kadosh is referring to the Shabbos, and it says that the Shabbos day will be kadosh, and Rashi explains over there that it means kadosh b'man, because man wouldn't fall down. That's the first time used in the Torah. And so, what's pshat that it's kadosh? That Shabbos is meaning that the fact that man doesn't come down makes it holy. The pshat is not that, something wrong with man coming down and eating it. The pshat is that Shabbos is a holier day, and in order for it to have its own definition, there has to be something that defines it separate from everything else, and therefore it gets cut off from what everything else had because it needs its own definition. So the dynamic is, it's not that if you go ahead and you decide that you're going to be machmir randomly, or you're going to decide to think or be different per se, that makes you someone that's kadosh. It's the process works the other way. A person, a genuine human being, like we see in the story here, a genuine being has a perspective or emotion about something. And then in terms of the reaction, something happens in the world, like happened with this guy in the story. And so if you genuinely want to grow and develop, then you take on a status of extra, of a higher relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as a result of that genuine desire and genuine acceptance upon yourself of a higher level of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, as a result of that, then you then abstain, right? Just because now that I'm on this new level, I can't do those things because those things are inappropriate for what I am. But the abstaining never creates kedusha. The kedusha is that you decided you wanted to become and to get to a higher level of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That is the etzem thing. And the word, the idea of why that makes it that Rashi was had to learn it from Kohen is because of the following thing. It's true that all of Klal Yisrael are be'etzem called Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. And Rashi explains that Kohanim means Sarim, and the Sar is like a representative, an officer for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because we represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that puts us on a higher level. And as such, we have to abstain from certain things, which is why we're also called Kohanim. Mamleches Kohanim refers to all Jews. And if you look throughout Korach, where he tried to take over the Kahuna, he said, Madua, why are you being misgad? Kulam kedoshim. That kedusha is a constant concept that reoccurs in Parshas Korach when they discuss Kehuna. And the reason is because Kehuna, the definition of a Kohen is a Sar, and a Sar he's a representative of the king, and therefore, as his representation, that puts him on a higher status, and as a result of that, he has to abstain from more things, right? And the only reason I believe that Rashi uses the Kohen as opposed to Yisrael is because the truth is that for Yisrael, although they are called Mamleches Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, that is only in contrast to Shar Umos HaOlam, which is the rest of the nations of the world. But the reason why that's not good enough is because the standard that Yisrael takes on is actually just to bring them back to the original idea of man per se, Adam per se. And Yisrael, and this is, right now we don't have time to get into all the rayas for this, but Yisrael is the quintessential man. He is Adam. That's what he is. It goes out the Navi, it calls Yisrael Adam Atem and Achen Kadam Temusu, and there's a lot of the different rayas for it. But the simple idea of Yisrael is that Yisrael is meant to be a human being, the human being, right? And that is the ikar of what a Yisrael is, and therefore the Parshas and all of the things that he does, it doesn't bring out the idea of the fact that kedusha, the definition of it, is the idea of an elevated status per se, in essence, because the elevated status of Yisrael in contrast to a guy is really not true in objective terms, because really a Yisrael just gets back to what an Adam is, and Goyim are considered an Amadom Lechamor. They're considered to be, that's also several places in the Gemara, they're considered to be on the level of animals in terms of the way that they interact and systemize themselves. And so the idea is that the reason why Rashi waited until Parshas Emor to talk about it in terms of Kehuna is because Kehuna is an additional level of Havdalah, of separation, that shows that the idea of Kedusha comes based off a status. And that is why Rashi waited, I believe. And if you look at the end of Parshas Kedoshim, you can actually see very clearly that it says over here, so you see it's mefurish in the pasuk. The idea of Kedusha comes from the fact of Havdalah. Havdalah, the definition of Havdalah is separation. It means that you define your mavdil. The entire Torah, the entire objective of Torah is to be mavdil, to give each thing its gedder, its definition, right? And that is the vort. The vort is that it works that way. First, something is defined. You're mavdil it, and then as a result of the fact that it has its own definition, its own Havdalah, that is what makes it that you that's what makes it that this thing is kadosh. So the Ikar Taich of Kedusha is the idea that somebody has a genuine desire to achieve and to take on a new status of relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it comes from a genuine sense of a desire to grow and to be more holy, and to be more of a human being, and to be more dedicated to the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Mimela, you have your parish. And that's the answer to our Kasha on Nazir, because the Gemara says clearly that it's a chait that he was parish, but being parish is part of the Nazir process. So why is the Torah saying that he should be parish? So the answer is, like we're saying, the idea that a Nazir doesn't drink wine is a din mimela. He has a desire, like you saw in the story. The Nazir has a desire to be closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't want his Yetzer Hara, his inclination to indulge in physicality, to overcome him, right? Just like the person in the story. He saw himself, he was so good looking, and he was like, oh my gosh, I should just go out and indulge in gashmias in the world, and I should do all these things as women. So he said, I don't want that. I don't want that to become who I am. So therefore, he became a Nazir, and he went to the other extreme for a period of 30 days. And that is what Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik said, Kamocha Yerbun Nozrin Naziris B'Yisrael. And since Naziris is a concept, is one of the models for taking on additional Kedusha, we can use that as a basis for the general understanding of Kedusha, of taking on more Kedusha, which is that it must be as a genuine response and desire to become more and want a higher level in terms of yourself, but it has to evolve organically. If you decide to go the other way, then you decide to say, oh, let me decide to intellectually decide that I'm gonna take on more chumras and then I'm gonna be holier. That's wrong. That will not work ever. There first has to be an organic, real human emotion, genuine emotion that is not driven by intellect in terms of a decision per se. Meaning you can get to the point where you will emotionally decide that with your intellect, but there has to be a genuine human emotion that says, I want to be better. And as a result of that, you can do the precious. When it goes the other way, that is completely destructive. And on that, Chazal say that no drain adarim markilu bone bamos. It's as if you're bone abama. Because what happens when you go the other way is that you end up creating your own cult. And you end up making something that has no shaykhs to the human condition, has no shaykhs to the underlying sense of genuine human emotion. It's just something that you fabricated, and you wanted to keep more chumras, and you wanted to decide that you're better because you do certain things. All these things, none of these things are ever going to be real or sustainable, because they don't come organically. They don't evolve organically. The organic process is that you learn, and if you learn and you become inspired by your understanding or internalization, then that will lead to you wanting to do more, and then it'll be a self-feeding growth process. But it must be that in order for precious to be a good thing, it has to be that it comes from a unique, genuine desire that a person has on himself. And just to finish off, the idea of Avera, and this is Stam, just an aside for it, that people generally, I don't know if they know this, but the idea of Avera per se is like what we're saying. To be Oiver means to pass, right? The idea of calling Chatayim Averos is that Chatayim, Lavin and Asayan, when a person keeps them all, they create an identity, right? A structure of life, which is when observed, when taken seriously, creates the structure of a Jew, what a Jew is. When we say that a sin, is an avera, we mean that when you did that wrong thing, you basically digressed on what you are. You destroyed the structure. You were oiver. Avera comes from the word oiver. You passed. You destroyed the structure of the definition of the geder. So here's the geder is your definition, who you are as a Jew, and then when you're over that and you pass that and you destroy that, then you destroy the identity structure, and that is what we mean in terms of avera. So avera refers to the impact that it has on your Jewish identity when you violate one of the mitzvahs or lavin, that it takes away from what you are. And in terms of the arayos aspect of all of this, there's different ways you can say it, but in simply speaking, if you think about it on the most simple fundamental level, the idea of arayos, at least in terms of krovim, which is most of them, right, closer siblings, hagufa in the most real way possible, it promulgates this idea of the Judaism's demand for a person to go out and create his own identity. Because what happens when you inbreed is hagufa, this thing, meaning you have a person and then you have someone who's his relative, and then if those people marry each other, then they're never creating anything new. They're always it's very funny to think about, but it really, on the most simple level, it speaks to the loftier concept that we're discussing. In other words, we're mechayev you to have your own identity. You're mechayev you to have a sense of self, and that sense of self, when it grows and it becomes more, and it becomes kadosh, then it can be parish. It can abstain from more, and that's kedusha. But the Geder Erev on the simplest level, it does this. It demands that you define, and demands that you have your own separate definition by the practical means of the fact that you always have to go out and find someone who doesn't have shaychus to you, is not your karov, is not your relative, and that speaks to that need that you can't, when you have kids from two people who are krovim, and essentially in the literal gene pool, you're almost keeping it in the family. That would destroy, the idea of the individuality and newness of the people being born, because it's all inbred. So that's just a fascinating concept, like a very simple, like practical type of thing, but it ends up speaking to the same concept practically. So I thought it was fascinating. All right, have a great Shabbos, everyone, and I hope that this was insightful.